Joining us now, former governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore. Jim, I don't even know where to start. Let's start with the Caravan. What's the deal? It's now 10,000 people, you understand. They want to crash the border and just come into the United States. And, Governor, as you know, the loopholes are such that once they step foot in one little toe over the border, our hands are tied. And we can't hold them for over 20 days, and they have to be released. So what happens?
Well, I think that we're going to have to do something to make sure that they don't get into the country. The point is this. It's not that we're insensitive people or that we are not sensitive to the plight of children or any of that kind of thing. But this is a political maneuver by somebody. And I think that we're entitled to know some answers here. And we've got a little time between the time that they walk across Mexico, if they remain in a caravan across Mexico, to understand who organized it, who's managing it. How do you get people to sleep and to find some place to be and then to get up in the morning on time and move out? How do you get them food? This is all organized. And the question is by who? There's been no discussion about that. So we need to know who is trying to put multi-thousands of people on the American-Mexican border to try to crash the border. And then second of all, okay, if you have one person who's going to cross the border illegally, then of course you can arrest that person and deport them. Does it also mean then if you go to 10,000 people that law is suspended and that whole 10,000 simply get to race across the border and be a part of the United States? Well, that takes away the right to make immigration policy from the Congress of the United States. In a democracy, you can't do that. So there's just lots of things that we need to know about this. But in the end, how it's handled on the Mexican border is going to maybe have an impact upon the midterm elections one way or the other. And maybe it was always intended to.
Okay, so a lot of people think that it was intended to embarrass the president so we could have kids in cages and things of that nature. Let me just ask you this, Governor. Could this backfire? Because right now, middle America is looking at the TV, and here's what they're seeing. Mobs and caravans. I don't think that's particularly inspiring for independent and moderate Republican voters and moderate Democrat voters. I mean, does anybody think that 10,000 people invading the United States to overrun schools, take jobs, lower wages, does anybody think that's a good thing?
Look, I stand by the fact that you have to stand by the American law. If they wanted to have open borders and just let anybody into the United States that can get here from any border, then the Congress ought to debate that and pass that into law. But people can't take the law in their own hands and just come into this country any willy-nilly any way that they want to. That means that you have a lawless society. If you're lawless in immigration, you may as well be lawless in crime and law enforcement and in drugs and everything else. And finally, you break down into chaos. And, of course, that's what our enemies in the international field want. They want the United States to appear to be uncontrollable. They want it to appear that democracy doesn't work so that their alternative theory in the world can, in fact, take precedence. And that's an authoritarian, people control of economy type of approach that the Russians and the Chinese are putting forward. The only way to sell that stuff is to make America break into pieces. And that's what worries me about the far left in this country. They seem to be willing to have mob rule. They may be willing to shout people down in orderly meetings, to attack people, to behave in this radical way. I think what the far left is not completely understanding is that Americans are reacting negatively against them because of all of their mistreatment, because of all their radicalism, because of their espousing of socialism, which I don't think people in this country really want for their future and for their kids. So, I think that the reason that the polls are tightening is because the American people are reacting against the left. And that's something maybe they're just not capable of understanding.
Well, something is happening because Republican turnout in certain areas, I heard yesterday, with the early voting, Governor Gilmore, is bigger than it's ever been recorded ever. And as you know, being in politics and electoral politics for so long, early voting for the Democrats always outpaces Republicans. It always does. They've got that figured out. But now the Republicans seem to be turning the tide on it, and they're getting massive people to turn out. So it's going to be very interesting, Governor, going forward. How do you see the midterms playing out right now, Governor?
Conventional wisdom has been that the Democrats will take the House of Representatives, but that the Republicans will keep the Senate. it is now completely certain that the Republicans are going to keep the Senate. In fact, they'll probably increase their majority in the United States Senate. The House races, of course, are individual races all across the United States, and it just depends on how things are running in individual districts. But I think once again over the past year, the far left has sent a message, and that message is race, gender, and hatred. And they want to try to project that over onto the Republican side, but I don't think it's working. I think that people in the United States can recognize hate and division coming from the far left, and they're rejecting it. Mm-hmm. Now, will it happen in this midterm? We just don't know. It's 2 weeks away. Let's wait and see. But things will go on after that. But I know one thing's for sure: the Republicans, I believe, will have the Senate.
Well, I do too. I think they're going to gain 5 seats, and now we understand that all of a sudden Wisconsin in play. That was on no one's radar screen. One poll has that race within the margin of error there for Tammy Baldwin, who's the Democratic incumbent. Jim Gilmore, let me ask you this straight out. This just in from Sky News. Sky News is reporting that Jamal Khashoggi's body parts have been found in the garden of the residence of the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, and the remains are pieces of remains. They're all chopped up, and they said that his face was disfigured, his head cut off, and gruesome things like that nobody really wants to deal with at 9 a.m. The president says there's going to be an accounting for this. This is getting really bad, Governor. We have a lot of ties there, $110 billion military deal. We're involved with them in the Yemeni civil war crisis. We've increased our ties to the Saudis. Seems like MBS changed its story here about 5 times. How do you see the president reacting to this, Governor?
Well, I think that the United States is put into a bad situation here because we are allies with the Saudis. They do provide a major support for United States foreign policy. They are a major oil power, and they're a major foothold in the south part of the Middle East. If you're going to reject the global domination of the region by Iran, then you have to have a counterweight. And right now that counterweight is Saudi Arabia and Iran. However, I want to make a clear statement about this. I'm not one of those Republicans that basically says that this kind of thing with Khashoggi doesn't matter. I think it does matter. I think that you simply cannot support an open murder of this kind of brutality and horribleness. I think that righteousness is an American national asset. I think liberty and freedom and justice is an American asset. I think the Eastern Europeans rejected the Russians and came to the West because they wanted to be free and they wanted to have a more just society instead of some Russian secret police. So I just don't think the United States can stand for murder. I think we have to condemn it, and I think there have to be consequences. I recognize the global implications of the alliance, but we can't simply sign on to murder in a consulate where people are supposed to be able to go into their country's consulate and have security and safety, and have them kidnapped, sawed apart, and murdered is not in the Gilmore game plan.
I agree with you. So what do we do?
Well, I think that we're going to have to begin to have a serious discussion about what really happened, establish those facts, get that straight. Don't just rely upon the media, which will tell you anything politically. Get to the actual truth in the bottom of it, and I believe that much of that is underway now. And then I believe that you have to have a measured response to make it very, very clear to the people of the world that we're not on board with that. And that means some consequences, unfortunately, to the alliance. But the Saudi prince has to understand that he was the one that impinged upon the alliance, that put the alliance in danger by supporting murder. We just simply can't be this way. We condemn the Russians for going into England and planting poisons in order to try to kill people. You can't have political murder. That can't be a part of the future of the world. You simply cannot tolerate it. It's going to happen because of authoritarian countries, but we can't stand up with it.
I think you've summed it up better than anybody I've had on so far. We had Rand Paul on last week, who was very upset by this. And one of the things that Rand Paul said, he said, look, I am going to go to the Senate and I am going to get an accounting and a vote on our involvement for the Saudis and the Emirates in the Yemen civil war. and get the senators, get my colleagues to come down on this one way or the other, support it or not. Is that getting Congress involved? Is that how they should be involved in this, or do you see it in a different way, Governor?
Well, I think Congress certainly has a role to play in American foreign policy. We don't talk about it a lot, and some commentators even say that they really don't, that it's all up to the president and the executive branch. I don't think that's the way the Constitution works. I think our foreign policy is conducted by the president, but it is certainly broadly made and influenced through the Congress also. So the point is, it's legitimate to go to the Congress and have that conversation, but they have limited power to do but so many things. But frankly, they can set a standard. The Congress can set a standard if they choose to act. One more thing about Yemen. Everybody that's listening, pull your maps out and take a look at where Yemen really is. And it's on the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. So if you have Iran to the north, and they are fomenting this revolution and this civil war down in Yemen, you get Saudi Arabia flanked on both north and south. They can't put up with that, and that's why they're trying to defend themselves. But war is always horrible, particularly in a third world country. The humanitarian impact is awful, but they make the decision about how they think that they have to protect their country. And that's really what's going on. So the point is that Yemeni conflict is more complicated than it first appears on the press.
I want to get to an article that you had written just the other day, and one of the things that you said in the piece, you talked about the relationship we have with the Chinese, and of course a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people predicting that China will eventually overcome the United States as an economic power, will be indebted to them, etc. You have a little bit of a different take on that. You want to share that with our audience, Governor?
Yeah, I'm just not that pessimistic. Everybody, conventional wisdom in America these days is America is on decline and China is on the rise. And I just reject that. I just don't agree with that at all. I think that the United States has the absolute advantage for the future. We're the ones, at least so far, that have a free economy. We're the ones that still have a free country that everybody looks to and wants. We're the ones that actually bring material benefit to our system. The Chinese have got a real problem on their hands. And their problem is that in a modern society in the 21st century, they cannot continue to run an authoritarian government. And yet that's their vision for the world. That's their vision for China, that they're going to control the Western Pacific, East Asia. They're going to control it, and they're going to use authoritarian methods to do that. And in fact, you see concentration camps now in Western China set up against minorities. This kind of brutality cannot last in the 21st century with the internet, modern media, modern communication, and frankly, a rising middle class in China. Their problem is they're building their middle class, which is a good thing, but the middle class is not going to stay under a communist dictatorship forever. I believe that the future belongs to the United States. I believe that we are the ones who have all the advantages going forward. The 21st century is not going to be a Chinese century. It's going to be an American century again.
What about our debt? A lot of people now getting concerned about the debt, the tax cuts of the president, which I know both you and I are very much in favor of, and I think they fuel this economy. I've tried to tell our listeners, if you look historically at tax cuts and the effect they have on the economy and growth, right, in growth, then the main thing is there's a lag between when the tax cuts take effect and when the revenue increases to actually outpace what it was prior to the tax cuts. So there's a lag. The president also calling in his cabinet out of the blue and saying, time to get out your green eye shades. I want a 5% cut from everybody across the board. You can find it. Have a good day. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I want your listeners to, from time to time, go on my webpage, my nonprofit policy organization called AmericanOpportunity.org, AmericanOpportunity.org. And you'll see that over the years, we've written about economic growth and we've written about foreign policy. You alluded to a recent article that I wrote on foreign policy. I've actually written 6. And we also have some people writing on some Chinese issues and some other issues like that that are on our webpage, AmericanOpportunity.org. But one of our oldest positions that we've done in our organization is the Growth Code, which was designed at the time that the left was in charge of the country and the wages were not growing and people were not working and unemployment was high and growth was low. And we proposed that there be a policy of tax cuts for economic growth. Well, that's now been done. Mm-hmm. And, the whole point is this: how are you going to get out of the debt? You're either going to have to raise taxes in order to finance the debt, or you're going to have to grow in order to create more revenue, build a bigger pie. But at the end of the day, it doesn't do you any good to increase revenue if you just spend the same revenue out again. If you raise growth by $1 billion and you spend $1.5 billion, you're still in the hole. So at the end of the day, we have some major decisions in this country about how we're going to spend our money. Right now, we're basically moving. The left is trying to move us in the direction of socialism, which is a transfer of money from one pocket to the other. But at the end of the day, there's no limit to that, and that increases the debt. And furthermore, drives out money that's going to be absolutely essential for the coming conflict of the 21st century. And our military spending that's going to be absolutely necessary, our research, our development, our science. These things that also have to be pushed forward. So we have a lot of priorities, and good governance and good executive leadership is going to be and good congressional leadership is going to be necessary to help define that spending.
So we can't touch entitlements because the president has made that promise on multiple times. That was part of his economic platform. He said, I have a deal. The deal is you've paid into Social Security. You've paid into these different things. The money's going to be there. I'm not going to cut that. And that represents what? Over 50% of the budget right there. He's not going to cut military spending. So when you look at a 5% cut across everything else, discretionary spending, you're not talking about trillions of dollars, are you?
Well, the age-old desire of the American conservative is to actually do an inventory and an analysis of where we're spending money, and then have a policy discussion, a real political discussion out of the community, either in campaigns or in elections or otherwise, as to what we're spending our money on and what we have to spend our money on. But one thing is real sure, and that is if you increase taxes, you reduce economic activity. If you increase taxes, you reduce economic activity. It means, and that's the whole approach of the left. Their goal is to simply go for the bucks and grab the money from anybody they can get it from. And they usually make it, quote, they're rich, unquote. But I can promise you, John, based upon all the numbers I've ever seen, in order to pay for this debt and to pay for this government, if it's going to be a socialist government, you got to go into the middle class and get that money. You just have to. And conservatives don't believe in that. We believe in people keeping as much of their own money as they can. That's why when I ran for governor, I pushed the car tax cut. And that's what the goal is. The goal is to give people more control over their own lives by letting them keep more of their own money. That's the Republican conservative mantra. And that's what we have to try to do for the future.
Governor Jim Gilmore, that is a great analysis of where we are today. That's why I love having you on. So refreshing. Thanks for your time, sir. Hey, for more information, you can go to the governor's website, AmericanOpportunity.org, AmericanOpportunity.org. That's Jim Gilmore's website, and where you're going to get a sober, salient, cogent analysis of world affairs. How's that, Governor? Cogent?
Thanks, big guy.
Salient?
I'll try to be a little more flamboyant next time. Say some radical stuff to
and
excite
succinct.
everybody.